everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. I did want to say we are also live streaming this presentation. Don't worry, nobody can see you in the audience. However, if you do have questions or comments, I'm going to need to bring the microphone to you. And this is mainly for the benefit of our live stream viewers so they can hear you. They won't necessarily be able to see you, but they'll be able to hear you. And we're also going to record it. And so we'll have those comments and questions in the recording as well. So I'm going to start with a brief introduction. Art will do his presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A period shortly afterwards. I do want to bring to your attention, we've put the March exhibits card at your place so you can see what's going on in our galleries during the month. And this Saturday, there are 2 receptions for 2 exhibits. The one in the Dupree Lobby Gallery, which if you haven't seen it yet, are works not just on paper, but works of paper by Irving artist Mark Goad. The procedure is really, really fascinating, and I encourage you to take a look and really just stroll around all the galleries if you like. But his reception is Saturday, 2 to 4, and as well as the upcoming exhibit in the Carpenter Lobby Gallery on the north side. These will be large-scale paintings by Jo Timming, and her reception will be Saturday, 2 to 4, so 2 concurrent receptions. So please join us if you can. Alrighty, I have no idea if the live streaming has started yet, but I'll go ahead and launch into the intro for Mr. Fairchild here. And thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Marcy.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcy Inman. I'm Director of Exhibitions and Educational Programs here at the Irving Art Center. And welcome to Lunch and Learn, both to our audience, our live audience that's joining us today, as well as those who are joining us via live stream. Today is March 7th, 2023, and our guest speaker is Art Fairchild, Dallas artist Art Fairchild, whose sculptures, Trio and Unfurling, are actually in our sculpture garden here at the Art Center. So if you have not taken the time to stroll through the sculpture garden and to view the many pieces of sculpture, I do encourage you to do so and to take a close look at Art's 2 pieces that are really beautiful and have actually been here for about 2 years now. Art is now a full-time artist with a studio in Dallas. But before then, he founded and ran a full-service trade show exhibit design and production company for a number of years. His skilled designs and engineering projects were featured nationally for several well-known clients. But despite all his success in this arena, his overwhelming desire to pursue a career as a full-time artist never subsided. So now, leap forward. As I said, he does have a studio in Dallas where he works full-time, doing private and public commissions. He's known for combining his rigorous engineering adeptness with his aesthetic intuition to create dynamic and visually captivating works of art. His art is abstract, that is to say non-representational, and the material he uses is primarily, but not exclusively, but primarily steel. And he works in both monumental and smaller scale. His designs range from simple forms to very intricate compositions, exploring the interaction of shape, form, and balance. Familiar themes seen in his work range from a repetition of elements and mathematical arrays to themes of dance and nature. Art has exhibited in both one-person shows and juried shows in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. His work can be found in both private and public collections in Texas, including the city of Round Rock, the town of Addison, and the city of Bern. So without further ado, please help me welcome Art Fairchild.
Thank you, Marcy. Yeah. Well, thank you, guys. Thanks for coming today. I have to tell you, before we start, I'm going to probably have to rely on my notes. So excuse me if I don't look at you during the time I need to refer to those. So I'll try to make it as personal as possible, but I have to rely on these. So anyway, we'll start out. This is a list of some of the shows that I've exhibited in and some of the commissions and that kind of thing. So I don't know if you can read it from where you are, but that is kind of a list of some of those things. I'm a professional artist in a studio in Dallas, as Marcy said, and my art practice is full-time. So I'm in the Trinity Groves area, Dallas, just west of downtown. And I'd love to have guests, so if you guys ever want to give me a call or come by, I'm more than happy to have you visit. So please know that that's on the table anytime. I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana in 1958, and I've participated in selected public works, and I'll talk about some of the actual projects a little bit later, but I'll give you a little bit of a background of kind of my upbringing and what I was interested in. So during my grade school years, I received private art lessons where I learned drawing techniques and the use of number of drawing and painting mediums. At age 10, I built a 2-story treehouse in the backyard. So I think that's where I began my interest in three-dimensional work and engineering and visualizing those kinds of things. And then after college, I started working in the exhibit industry, and I fell in love with the variety of projects and figuring out how to build these interesting and challenging undertakings. And in 1991, I founded a trade show exhibit company where we designed and produced trade show exhibits. So this next slide, I'm going to show you some of the exhibits that we produced. All of these are exhibit stands made for companies that show in industry-specific shows. And the one in the top left corner is a company called Computer City. You guys probably remember Computer City. This was 16 foot tall, had a 20-foot diameter ring. All of this is made to break apart and go together and pack in shipping crates. The one down below it is a local company, also based out of Dallas. They're no longer around, but it was a company called Highway Master, and they were in the mobile communication industry, and so we designed a booth for them so that they could give presentations, and they used a proprietary software for the trucking industry, so they were able to allow that truck driver to make telephone calls and things with touch-free devices, which was kind of state of the art at the time. And then Mr. Payroll Corporation, we built that booth for them. And all of these designs were meant to be functional and aesthetic, of course, but to have continuity with their collateral material and the things that they used to explain the products that they sold. And Mr. Payroll Corporation was one of the pioneers in the facial recognition industry. And so they had a check cashing machine where people could set up and then be able to come and cash their check without having the banks do their check cashing for them. It saved them money. So Burr Brown was actually one of the first booths that I designed from scratch. And it had a 5-foot diameter rotating sign at the top of it. So, I loved all the mechanics and the figuring out how to build these and put them together and make it easy and simple for the installers. And the Nesseltay Meadow was a 16-foot sculpture. It's not a sculpture. Well, it is kind of a sculpture, actually. But it's a 16-foot exhibit stand, and they were in the barcode industry, and they showed printers, and so they needed work surfaces to display those printers, and so we supplied them with those kinds of things. So that's what I did in my prior life, prior to starting my art career, and I did that in 2011. So in 2011, I decided to go full-time with with making art. And so in the next several slides, I'd love to show you images of pieces I've done and talk to you about the details I hope you find interesting. So in this next one, Trio, we'll start here. Trio is exhibited here at the Irving Art Center. It's out front, close to MacArthur. I believe that's on the east side of the building. And this is a sculpture made with 3 individual pieces. And the inspiration for this piece was to convey the message of diversification. So you had the 3 different colors that come together and make the one. And there's no hardware, no visible hardware on there. You can see us putting this thing together, and you might be able to see the hardware attachments. Uses a series of bed hooks that are laser cut and have receiving holes for those bed hooks for the piece that it adjoins to. And that's me in front of my garage grinding on this thing before it got powder coated. But all the pieces are powder coated in their individual sections that go together. So that's here at the Irving Art Center. The next slide is another piece that we have exhibited here called Unfurling. And Unfurling is made with 1/2-inch steel rod, solid steel, that makes the shape, that nautical shape. Unfurling was really I was looking at trying to explain new life. That was the objective. And so new life, whether that's beings of some sort or plants. This one in particular had plants in mind. So the unfurling is what ferns do as they grow their new leaves, and they spread open as they develop. It's made with a 1/2-inch steel that was forged and shaped, and then the small rods are welded to the 1/2-inch, and you can see up in the top right corner as that work was in progress, so you can kind of see how that took shape. And then this is me welding that sparks. Everybody likes to see sparks, so that's an action shot. This next piece, whimsical spherical, this piece in this picture was when this was installed in Arlington along the green belt between the AT&T Stadium and the ballpark. It was there for 3 years. And it's made with hollow tubing. All of that's 3-inch tubing. There's about 250 linear feet of 2-inch tubing. So the ball itself weighs about 300 pounds. And the top right corner is a picture of all the caps. So it's hollow tubing and all the ends had to be capped off. So all of those shapes, as they intersect the sphere, have different shapes. So made templates for each one of those and cut them out individually out of steel, and then each one of those got welded in place. And then the bottom right-hand corner is this guy right here during its process. So this was kind of proof of concept. The way this all came about is I had in mind if you dropped objects, and if you could freeze that movement as they made their way to the floor, and took away everything except what remained in the sphere. So all of that random movement, and took away everything else. So I thought, well, that sounds like a pretty interesting idea, but let's see if I can make it work. So this was really a proof of concept. And then I put it on bearings so that it could turn. So this was the maquettes made with 1/2-inch PVC pipe from Home Depot. Lots of it. So anyway, so that's whimsical spherical. Let's see where I am. And then several years ago, I liked to watch Dancing with the Stars. And so I was inspired to make a series of work and kind of realizing these abstract shapes. So I used the 2 elements to represent the 2 dancers, so the leader and the follower. And the paso doble. Now, I don't know much about ballroom dancing, but it's beautiful to watch, isn't it? I mean, it's really a lot of fun. It's beautiful. And so although these are abstract and non-representational, I wanted to get the gist of those movements. So I looked at still pictures, I looked at videos of these dances that I knew very little about, but I was able to capture what I thought was some of the movement. The paso doble is a dance that represents a bullfighter and its cape. So the follower in this dance is the cape. And they use a lot of over the head movements. And so I tried to mimic that as they kind of had their hands up in the air. And I think I pulled that off on the paso doble. The two-step is, of course, the Texas two-step. And those pieces are where the two dancers are in unison and synchronized movements. And those two pieces really kind of show that. And I think in the next slide we'll see the different vantage points where you can see how those pieces sort of synchronize. Now again, this is my own inspiration, so whether you see dancers in that or not, it really you see the two elements interacting, and that was the primary objective. I used it for my own inspiration to make those interesting forms. And then, of course, tango fantasia, and we all have seen the tango dancers and how they kick their feet back. And, you know, you can see in this picture here of the red one, how it kind of flares back and very subtly trying to capture those movements. And then tango nuevo is a variation of the tango dance. And those are all steel. The one at the bottom, tango nuevo, is a stainless steel, highly polished. So the whole thing is very reflective. So you get reflections of reflections in that work. So everything's scalable. And two-step, the maquette that I just showed you, and we can go back, I think. Yeah, we can go back. This is the maquette, so it's about 20 inches tall. This guy is about 8.5 feet tall, almost 9 feet tall. And so you can see the different vantage points there. And you can almost see, perhaps after my explanation, how those pieces interact and are synchronized as though they were in step with each other. So that's two-step. In this next piece, this was done as a commission for the town of Addison, and it's in a permanent location in front of their community theater center. And we used programmable date-driven lights to display colored themes for holidays, and Addison blue for regular calendar days. It's 16 feet tall, and the concrete pour has the lights actually encapsulated inside that concrete. And the one in the top right-hand corner was a display of red, white, and blue for Martin Luther King Day and for Memorial Day and those kinds of holidays. And of course, the other one, I bet you all know that that's for Christmas, right? And so we had Christmas, and we did Valentine's and several other holidays. Halloween, we did an orange version. And but most of the time, it's blue. It's just solid blue. That's their town colors. The next slide is one of the things that I enjoy doing is all of the moving parts and making all of these things successful from the very beginning and ensure a successful outcome. There's a lot of planning, a great deal of planning, and I'm involved in all aspects of that. So these pictures here are showing the foundation for that. Well, it doesn't sound like that big a deal, but all of that has to be and work with what's coming next. So the placement of all of that and everything was very, very important, and the accuracy was needed in order for a bolt pattern that would be encapsulated in the concrete, as well as the light and the light placements and how we created those openings and where we stubbed up for the electrical before the concrete got placed. And so this top left corner here is a template that we actually made and made it in 3 sections so I could transport it. It's huge. It's about 12 feet wide. And so made that so that it gave the light placement. And then just below that is just to the right of that is the template lying on the ground that we had shaved the top of a hill off in a median, and that gave us the exact placement of where the electrical stub-ups would ultimately go. So I marked the ground there with that template, again ensuring that that it was very, very accurate. And then drove a piece of rebar in the center of those holes, and that's exactly where we would bring the electrical stub-ups. So that when everything else came together, that's where everything would be. So the picture down below it, you can see where the electrical stub-ups come up through the holes of that template, and see that we have a continuation. So in each one of those holes, we have two conduits, one daisy chaining to the other one, so you could run those lights with the controller and the electrical power. And then the bottom left-hand corner, I decided the best thing to do would be to build that all of the rebar and bolt assembly at my studio, so that, again, I could ensure the accuracy. So that's all welded together. And inside that rebar is all of the bolt pattern that's going to stick up through the concrete that the sculptures are going to attach to. And I forget how many bolts there are, but there's a number of them, and it all had to line up perfectly. So that enabled me to do that and maintain that accuracy. And then this is me and a buddy. I guess we're taking the leave outs. So we created leave outs in that first concrete pour. There's going to be two concrete pours. So the first one is going to have the bolt sticking out of the concrete. We're going to attach the sculpture to it, and then we'll come back to do a secondary concrete pour. And that's the reason for the rebar sticking up out of the perimeter too. That locks those two monolithic pours together. And then this is a diagram of the wiring. So we had to think about, where we placed the electrical, where we placed the junction box for all of the light controlling mechanism of that, and the address for each of those lights. So that was really for our use, and I shared that with the electric installer too, so that they would know what we were trying to do and understand the whole picture. And these are action shots. So these are all of the fabrication of doing something to that scale. The whole sculpture weighed about 3,500 pounds. So all of the components that made up the sides are very, very heavy, and the accuracy that it required to start and maintain those angles, and as it made its way around, it met properly, and I had one shot at doing that. So I really had to think about the process of how I would ensure its accuracy, and what I was going to be able to weld and what I wouldn't be able to weld. Weld with steel distorts the steel, and it's stainless steel especially. And some of that's going to be a mirror finish. So I had to think about how I'm going to contend with creating that angle exactly the way it needed to be without welding shapes on the back side of it that I was able to do with the other parts to maintain its shape. And I think you'll see in the other one what the next slide, what I'm talking about. I had gussets that formed the angles, but this far left image is a wooden structure that enabled me to have a very accurate angle that I could weld along the top side, which is going to be on the inside of the sculpture. So you have to really think about all of those steps as they occur, and try to make sure that you don't paint yourself in a corner, as it were. We would lose access to that. So those are kind of shots in the studio as that was being produced. So the two inside corners on this particular element are mirror polished, and so the plastic sheeting on that is what you're seeing there, and that's already got the angle welded and those two pieces properly, and then they're set in with the other adjoining pieces. And these are the gussets that I was talking about. So I shaped these gussets, and all of this is laser cut. So I create the drawings and laser cut those gusset pieces, And there's a very specific order. In fact, I wrote instructions for myself so that I could ensure that each step I didn't get ahead of myself. And so I referred to my steps to make sure that I didn't get out of order, because it was very, very critical that I do each step in its place. And those angled pieces ensure that I get exactly the angle that I need between the two pieces that they fit between. Does that make sense? So, and that's me inside there. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scale of this thing too. It was big, and I was able to crawl inside there and do some of the welding. And this next slide here are some other pieces that I've created. Traction. Traction is in front of the Public Heath Library in Boerne, Texas, part of their permanent sculpture. And it's made with 15 pieces that are arrayed. So the array is through the center of that, and each of those 15 pieces are just alike, but they array through the center. So there's a fastening mechanism that goes through the center, and then each of them bolt to each other. So it's powder coated as separate pieces and then assembled on site. And then Not on Call. Not on Call was a commission. This is at Cedar Creek Lake. It was a private collector that commissioned me to do this piece, and it's kinetic. So the wind turns that. The two upper elements turn. Of course, the bottom one is fastened to the concrete riser. It has lights in it also, so I did light studies and that kind of thing to know the placement of the lights. And it had to be very, very strong for the straight line winds that would come off the lake. That weighs about 3,500 pounds, and it still turns very, very freely. So there's bearings inside. And then Sector Cube is in front of the sub courthouse in Arlington. It's made with 35 1 foot by 1 foot squares, all held together with 1/2 inch bar. So the negative and positive spaces there. But the interesting thing, I think, with this one too, just to tell you how labor intensive some of these are, there is 840 linear feet of weld. Now what that means, the next time you're driving in your car and the map tells you to turn in 800 feet, just look how far that is. And I'm making little bitty circles with weld and then grinding those down. So each box has a weld on each side. So each of those planes have the equivalent of 4 feet of weld. So I found that kind of interesting. Maybe you do. It's a lot of work, tremendous amount of work. So, and that's part of their permanent collection. Ravel was a private commission that I did for some folks. That's in their front yard. This is made with over 10,000 potato chip sized pieces of steel welded together, and it also turns. So their neighbors really enjoy when they're walking by to give that a spin. They like it. Gateway was a commission for the city of Round Rock. Whoops, we lost something. Oh, okay. And Gateway is about 21 feet wide, 15 feet tall. Weighs about 7,500 pounds. And this was made in two sections for transporting. And then when we got there, we married those two pieces and then made a keystone piece, which is the top fin that tied those two sections together. And it's not going to go anywhere. It's really, really, really heavy. But that's in a beautiful park setting, and the lights are kind of nice at nighttime. Orbit, the one in the middle here, let me see if I can get that to turn for us. Nope. Well, it's made with 5 motors. Thought I had the video going on that, but anyway, it's made with 5 motors, so the whole composition turns, and then there are individual motors in 4 of the hemispheres that are static, meaning that they don't move, but the other side of that hemisphere does turn. So there's 2 that turn the upper hemisphere and 2 that turn the bottom hemisphere. Do we know why that video is playing? Do we know? let me, oh, did it start to? Let me go back, excuse me just a moment, because I want you to see the movement. It's kind of, yeah. So you kind of get an idea of all of that movement that's happening. And two of the hemispheres that are turning, the ones on the bottom, are turning with the movement of the whole composition, and two of them that are turning the upper hemisphere are turning against the rotation of the entire composition. So there's a lot of movement there. Yeah, it's kind of fun. A lot of moving parts and a lot of engineering that went into this, and so of course there's bearings and motors and allowances, very, very tight tolerances to make that work. So the next slide are some more works. Echoes was a piece that's sold. It's made with glass pieces, so I primarily work in steel, but I've worked in wood. I was a carpenter in my early years, so I love working with wood. And glass was something that I was interested in too, and made molds and cast that glass to use as the secondary element in there. And they're all lighted, and so all of those glass pieces are lighted from above and below, and they change colors. So there's animation and that kind of thing. Stained glass would look fantastic. I've done some, Quentin, with stained glass, similar to stained glass, where I actually water jet cut glass pieces and nest those together. And I have made sculpture panels similar to that. They're real heavy, so they would endure the weather conditions and that kind of thing because of their exposure. And then Journey was done in memory of a dear friend of mine, and this is Journey being journey of life, and each of those tubes represent his 92 years. So there's 92 tubes, and all of life's twists and turns, and our journey, hopefully upward. And so Journey, and that's in my private collection. And then Sphericity is a very similar to this here. It's just a larger scale, and instead of the angled axis, it's perpendicular. It's vertical. That was displayed in Houston. That's a photograph that was taken by a photographer in Houston for a temporary installation. And wow, that's it, you guys. Yeah. So if you have any questions about any of these, I can scroll back. If you want to look at any of those images, I'd be happy to do that too. So, yes, ma'am.
Okay, excuse me, just a reminder, we need to use the mic, okay?
Curiosity. What happened to the sculpture in Arlington? Where is it now?
That one sold, and it sold to a private collector in Aspen, Colorado, and it's at their home. And they have a beautiful collection. It was a very, very, very expensive home in Aspen. Of course, I guess there's probably not inexpensive homes in Aspen, but it was an honor to be included in their collection, and so that's its forever home. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Hi.
I was wondering how long it would take you to make something like Fantasia, and do you use recycled steel or do you use something
That's a great question. Most of my work is not done with found objects because of the planning and just the method that I go about building these things. So it's not recycled for the most part, except for the chip ball, the ball that was made, or the square that was made with the chips. Those were found chips from a manufacturer. But most of the time my work is made with sheet goods, and I laser cut them, and I can lay all of that geometry out in a CAD package and have that laser cut very, very accurately. And so the need for good virgin material is there. But it takes me about, Tango, the one we did for the city of Addison, took me about 4 months to build. So now, of course, that a lot of planning and preparation for the installation site and that kind of thing, but a total of about 4 months. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? You want to look at any other pictures?
Hey, Art, I just have a comment.
Okay.
Not only are you an artist and an engineer, but I consider you an architect as well.
Well, I love architecture, and it's interesting that you see that in my work, and I appreciate that. Thank you. I love architecture, and I pay attention to all the detail that I see when I look at the outside or the inside of a building, and not just the composition, but the size and scale of pieces in comparison to what they're next to and that kind of thing. So that probably bleeds over into my work some. Yeah. And I built tree houses when I was a kid. So, yeah.
You mentioned that the piece done in a front yard, the neighbors go by and push it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you ensure something that heavy is able to be moved by the wind or just someone pushing it?
That's a good question. I make it out of strong material. For example, the post on that is just a very, very solid piece of steel pipe. And so I gauge the strength of those materials and how they're welded and what kind of reinforcement that I can add to that to strengthen them. And in that particular one, I had gussets. So the solid pipe that makes that axis has gussets that are shaped between the vertical tube and the base. So it really makes that very, very strong. So they have to be safe. They have to be safe, and it is. Yeah, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Art, you have a very tiny little maquette on the lectern with you. Tell us
Oh,
about that project.
Yes, please. Well, one of the things, I make the maquettes, and I can use plastic. This one's made out of wood. This is 3D printed. So it's a design concept. I've not built this large, but I really kind of like it. And I can see this being any size. Everything's scalable. So this is tiny, but it could be 10 feet tall. It could be 20 feet tall. And so this gives me a very inexpensive way to see what my design looks like in actual 3D. So I can look at it from all angles and really decide before I go into any sort of production, metal-wise, if I want to change anything. And so this is a 3D printed object. So it's a design. I designed in a package called SketchUp. It's what architects use to create very quick renderings. And it just, you can output it as a 3D. Isn't that cool? Yeah.
Going back to that item she was talking about where the neighbors come by and spin it, I'm assuming that you use bearings.
Yes.
And now, are these bearings good without lubrication, or do they require lubrication?
That's a good question. The bearings are sealed bearings, and they're not. There's no real friction or heat that is the enemy of bearings, and so they last forever because they're sealed. They're sealed with the proper lubricants, and they're not subjected to those things that would otherwise destroy a bearing. I use a lot of different kinds of bearings, but you have basic bearings that take the lateral load, and then you have what's called a thrust bearing to take the vertical load. And so that thrust bearing on that sculpture. Its capacity is 14,000 pounds. Well, it weighs nowhere close to that. So everything's over-engineered, and kind of goes back to your question earlier about how do you ensure that these things hold up. They're just over-engineered. Yeah. Yes.
Speaking of engineering, was that your background in college, or did you combine that with art?
No,
No.
I think I learned that from building tree houses when I was a
Okay.
kid. That's a great question. I'm asked that all the time. I love engineering. I'm fascinated with the things that people do, much greater than what I do. But I like it. I enjoy it, and certainly have some sort of aptitude for doing that. And I like building puzzles and figuring out how to make things. So, I think that all of that coupled together really just allows me to be able to execute some of these ideas. And the trade show stuff, it was all about how it would attach and then how it would come apart. And I actually thought about where the installers would be and how they would handle those parts and in what order they would go in, and then ultimately how they would crate and how they would ship safely. And so the engineering part of that was included also. So I've had a lot of practice. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Art, you have a very analytical mind and an approach to making your sculptures, which is, of course, to the benefit of everyone involved. They're very carefully thought out and constructed and built. But do you also ever just sketch or just play and kind of are a little more fluid with your creative approach?
I keep saying I'm going to try to do that. One of the things that appeal to me about, as an artist, we do things that we like, that we either put in our yards or in our house, and so it has to appeal to us on some level. My appeal to the work that I do is from the knowledge that I've gained over the years, knowing the capabilities that are there and marrying those capabilities together. And I enjoy the process that I go through in as labor-intensive as it is, and as uninteresting as it might be to some, it's very interesting to me. So I really enjoy figuring out how to make these objects and how I'm going to go about building it, and I like that process. So that gets included in my work. I have done some work. In fact, Unfurling was done. All that pipe was done by heating and incrementally bending, and I sketched out a pattern for that. So that's probably as close as I've come to making things that are sort of organic and think as you go. But I had a pretty good idea what I was going to do in the very beginning. So it was drawn out in great detail and then just executed.
I'm going to go back to that little maquette on the lectern again,
Sure.
because it seems to have a bit more of a playful, organic, improvisational feel to it. Was that something that you felt more comfortable doing with the 3D printing program, or it just seems a little different from some of your other work? And I realize it's just a concept piece,
Sure. Well, I'm constantly exploring new ideas, which differs from a lot of my artist peers where their work is very recognizable. I hope that my work is recognizable, but I can see where it might not be. And the reason behind that is I like to explore. I just want to explore. So I'm constantly looking for things that I've not seen before, which is not new, but I strive for that. And that idea, I don't know where it came from, but I love the little peek-through windows and the openings that you can see in that. And I make rules for myself. And so there's a dimensional plane that runs through the center of this, and you can see it from this direction, perhaps. And so that center plane, and then where these openings intersect either on one side of that plane or the other. And so there's 8 of these guys, I believe, and 4 of them intersect on one side of that and 4 on the other, which is the opposite on the other side. So just fun stuff that might go unnoticed, but that was, to add interest. So it is kind of playful. It almost reminds me of mid-century modern, kind of, doesn't it?
For sure, for sure. Well, your work is very modular, and theoretically, you could make something like that from individually 3D printed elements,
Sure.
correct?
Sure.
Have you ever considered doing that?
3D printing is really the deal. I mean, the printing houses with 3D printing methods. So I think that will certainly open up some opportunities, and I love incorporating our technology along with my work, obviously, with laser printing and creating the shapes that I'm going to use for pieces. And so 3D printing, as long as it holds up and it's strong, and the materials, there's a wide variety of materials that are available, and that's a very, very good possibility. So, maquettes for now, who knows what might be down the road as I learn. And so as I learn new things and explore, I'm very curious. And so, I learn about what's being done, and I'm fascinated by it. And you never know when I go, I think I can incorporate that in an idea. And so, yeah, the possibility's great. They print in metal now. Yeah, which is just amazing. And you wait for the price of all that stuff to go down too. So there's, finding that window that really makes sense.
Yeah, food, meat, sugar, all kinds of materials.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can almost
yeah.
use anything in the 3D printer, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's true, Art, because I've followed your work for a long time, but I'm realizing more today. One thing keeps popping in my head, and that's Leonardo da Vinci, who was as grounded in science as he was in art. And that's one of the things I admire about your work. When I saw the inside of Orbit, it was like looking like some fine machine on the inside.
Right,
And I love
right.
Porsches, and it's just like a Porsche engine. And I really admire the fusion you're working on, of vision and science behind it. Congratulations.
Thank you, George. I dig that too. You got to see that during the build process and see those parts that are just so beautiful on their own that no one gets to see. But that's what I enjoy doing. So going back to and speaking to, my need to satisfy my own interest and appeal, that's where that occurs too. Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, exactly. The curse and the blessing all at the same time. It keeps me out of trouble. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that comparison to Leonardo da Vinci and that.
That was very complimentary.
No, I like that because, that's, I think, one of the purposes of art is to investigate the world, to see how things work, how they are made, how we perceive them, and how we can create new things.
Sure. Artists as a whole, I think, generally speaking, are trying to say something. They have a message to give. In my work, I'm not always trying to do that. I'm just looking at harebrained ideas that I can pull off. And of course, you had to add the aesthetics added to that, and hopefully it looks good. But I like the mechanical part of my work and what goes into that. All the behind-the-scenes stuff. After my presentation, and this takes a long time, and not everyone's interested in seeing my drawings, that I do on the computer, all my CAD drawings and things like that. But some people are, and I always enjoy sharing that detail. But I spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours planning and drawing and seeing and looking at those kinds of things.
Most of your work seems to have sort of an energetic feel to it. Do you find that you're mostly inspired when you're in sort of a certain mood, or not necessarily? Like when you're happy or when you're kind of in a state of lull, you know? Does that make an impact at all?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I have to say probably not so much, because I'm even keel. No, I'm not like a painter. You can see their mood and maybe what phase of life they could be in through their painting, and that medium lends itself well to that. My work doesn't really lend itself, and I'm glad that you see that, but it's not typically my thought process. Does that make sense? Yeah. So. You guys ask great questions. This is the fun part. So.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Irma.
I was wondering where you get your ideas. Did they just come in during your blissful nights of sleep, or do they just come during the day while you're contemplating what you're going to do that day, or how do you get your ideas?
You know, I think I could probably answer that question 20 times if I was asked it 20 times, because I don't really know. It's kind of a mystery to me where some of that comes from. You know, I observe everything. I'm detail oriented, obviously, but I also look at detail and I see everything, and I see interesting shapes and peculiar things. And I'm wondering if maybe subconsciously some of that comes through. It's a great question. It's the hardest one I have to answer. And it's where that comes from, because sometimes I start with a blank piece of paper and I have no idea what's going to happen. And I think painters are that way to a large degree. You know, they might not have a concept of what they're doing. My design beginnings are similar, where I just start out and I'm not really sure.
Okay.
And so where they come from, I think it's God-given, really.
Inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you.
So when you get a commission,
Mhm.
do they usually say you're on your own, or do they many times have an idea, oh, I want something similar to that one, or what goes on with a commission?
Typically, that's a wonderful question. I love that process. And it's one very similar that I used when I was in the trade show business. And I would just try to round up as much information as I could, asking a whole myriad of questions. So I never knew where I might draw from, so I just piled it all on. I do a very similar approach with clients if they are unsure what they want. So I have, if you broke it down into two client typicals, one would know what they want or had a pretty good idea, and some might not know at all. And so I asked them to look at other work that I've done, and are there things about that appeal to you? I don't like to duplicate my own work, and I'm certainly not going to duplicate work that I've seen before. But I can gain inspiration from those. And so we can go through the process and those sorts of questions. What do you like? A lot of it has to do with scale, colors. You know, those are easy things. But the actual design, of course, a lot of that's budget driven too. So the amount of work that goes into these projects, and so can vary quite a bit. So I might use ideas from my own artwork, or even ideas of other artwork that they like and that I might be able to draw from. I'll give you a good example. So Orbit. I had some good friends that said, you know, could you do something like this? And they showed me a picture of George Rickey, which is a kinetic sculptor. and does amazing work. He's just incredible. But the one that they had were these square objects, and all of those squares kind of moved. It was a beautiful, beautiful piece, stunning, and it was air-driven. I thought, well, I'm not going to duplicate that. So I went in an entirely different direction. I thought, well, I'm not going to copy it. Well, what's the opposite of square? Is a round, right? So that's where orbit, the inspiration for that design came from. So I used that as inspiration in an entirely different way. So it wasn't inspirational from a copying standpoint, but just a variant to vary it as much as I could. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Thank you. That's a good one. Yeah. You guys?
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much, Art, and thank you, everyone, for your great questions and your observations and comments. So, and I encourage all of you to wander through the galleries in the sculpture garden while you're here. Okay.
That was
Thank
a
you
lot
so
of
much.
fun. I enjoyed it.
Great. We
Thank
really
you, guys.
appreciate it. Thank
Thank
you.
you for coming.